Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. We have a special episode right now. I want to give you a few quick updates. First, the governor just left a press conference in which she announced that the number of cases of the coronavirus has risen from 5 to 14 here in the state of Rhode Island. 3 of those are pediatric. They are all being treated at home except for one older Rhode Islander who's being cared for in a nursing home. The second major announcement that the governor made during this press conference is that she is changing the school vacation dates. In other words, closing schools for at least next week. That may go longer. So that's the big news out of the State House and the governor. Nationally, the president is expected to make an announcement of making a declaration of emergency nationally, which will free up a significant amount of financial resources to help stabilize financial markets and provide relief to small businesses. Joining me now to give more of a global sense to all this is Jean Lesieur, the former editor of France 24, a global journalist, educated at Columbia in New York, worked in Canada, a significant European editor. Jean, thank you very much for Skyping in today.
Good afternoon.
You have the perspective, just arrived here this week from Europe. Tell us what's going on in Europe. What's the EU doing to stabilize this health crisis as you see it?
Well, first, I'd like to say there is a definite change in mood in Europe, and there has been in the past, I would say, 36 hours. I left Paris yesterday, and the mood was the day before yesterday was still, serious, but pretty relaxed about this whole thing. It didn't feel like it was such a major catastrophe. It looks now like, what people feel like and live like after a big terrorist attack. I mean, you've known that after September 11. I mean, a national crisis, where there's a mixture of awe and fear, I think. And yesterday's speech by President Macron in France was a symbol of that. And by the way, I mean, it's a detail, but still, it was followed by over 25 million TV watchers yesterday, which, to give you a comparison, I think when the French national soccer team was in the final of the World Cup, I think there was 18 million people watching the game. 25 million people watched Mr. Macron yesterday delivering a beautiful speech as a I would say, unifier and protector in chief. He announced very major decisions about how to help small, big, medium businesses in France, right away, about how helping people who cannot go to work because, either they're ill or their company has to, is paralyzed because of the virus. And when I see the kind of sterile discussion about the ideological aspects of the Democrats' program as compared to what the Republicans want to do here. I mean, Macron was decisive last night, and in a way, even provoked the admiration of his opponents, which in France, which is almost as polarized as the United States, is quite a feat. And it was a mixture of a very solemn declaration, which both appeases people and makes them conscious that this is a very important crisis, and at the same time very concrete about how to help people go through the medical aspects of the crisis, but also the economic aspects as a national issue, but also as a personal issue for people who cannot no longer go to work, and they were reassured that they were going to have their salaries as usual.
We were in Paris about a year ago and saw firsthand the political division related to the yellow vest. The day we saw 2 of the marches, 80 to 90,000 angry French men and women marching in the streets of Paris, a big political divide in the country at that point. Obviously, in the U.S., there's similar discourse and division. Is this a rare opportunity for countries to come together, put aside the politics, as you mentioned, and begin to say, hey, listen, we have one united effort to control this virus, and then we can pick up our arguments after the fact, much the way the world did in World War II?
Yeah, it is a great moment. Well, if you look at it in the half full glass, Europe, the European institutions are making an effort to try and have a concerted effort to the Central European Bank is doing things. Madame Lagarde, who's the head of that European Central Bank, made a kind of a boo-boo yesterday when she announced that, when she said that it was up to national governments to deal with the problem, and then she was vilified by people who reacted and said, no, of course it's a European Union issue. It's even a world issue. Macron, in his speech yesterday, in a reference to Mr. Trump's speech the previous day, said that this virus has no passport. Right. It is not a foreign virus, which is attacking, would be some kind of a conspiracy by a country to attack another. It's something that should, must, and will be solved by a united world. And it doesn't matter it has no point in playing the blame game or where it starts from. I saw today that the Chinese are even accusing the Americans of having plotted that and infiltrated Wuhan in October and planted the seed of the virus. It's ridiculous. It's just as ridiculous to hear your president declare that we Europeans are not welcome in the United States because we're going to contaminate people. Of course, except the British will not contaminate the people. I still have to get an explanation of that. So it's it goes both ways. I think it's going to go the united way as the crisis becomes more destructive, which it is going to become. You can see
from a health crisis, certainly. Let's talk about Italy. Italy has had a very fragile economic condition for the better part of a decade. They have a very, very old population. The Italian healthcare system is not exactly of a first-class level. Will Europe, will the EU and other countries assist financially and from a healthcare standpoint to help the Italians slow the spread and the death rate that this disease is now taking hold?
Yeah, well, there's no other way but to help them. It's Italy has a large deficit and is not in agreement. In accordance with the European rule of having a 3% maximum deficit in their budget. But it's obvious that, and Macron's speech was very interesting last night about that, because he kind of decided to get rid of all those considerations about respecting, those artificial rules. The crisis is so grave that he's, he, in a way, it's funny because he's been accused of being the president of the rich. Yesterday, his program, to help companies and help the economy was extremely Keynesian and satisfied even the extreme left of the French political spectrum. Mr. Mélenchon, who's been accusing him of satisfying the rich and cutting taxes for rich people and stuff. No, Macron yesterday announced that, and he celebrated in a very spectacular way the welfare state, saying that far from being a burden for a country, a good welfare state with free health care and efficient, public services was a bonus for any country, for any society. I'm sure if Mr. Sanders listened to that speech, he'll be very happy to hear that. And
there is a major Democratic debate on Sunday night, and it is of the last two remaining primary candidates, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. It is being conducted in Washington, D.C., and without an audience. Is this a defining moment for the Democratic Party as you know it?
Well, I don't know if the debate will be, but the election definitely will be, because it's as outsider, foreigner, it's kind of embarrassing sometimes to watch the ideological debate here. Like Mitch McConnell, I said, was questioning the measures that the House is thinking about to help businesses, very practical measures. And he said, the Senate will never take this because of the ideological aspects of it. It's in today's world and facing the crisis we're facing now, having this kind of very old world, old and tired and senile world, those people still clinging to a dogmatic view of the economy and of, it's like, and sorry to come back to Trump again, but this attitude he has that, it's either a foreign plot to destabilize him and prevent his re-election, or his seeming obsession, apparent obsession about how Wall Street is doing. It's discouraging. I think and I hope that most world leaders have a different attitude and realize that this is a civilizational crisis. We are in uncharted territory.
Isn't that really this issue? We have this intersection of the world being incredibly flat, right? You can travel anywhere in the world almost instantaneously with very little restriction. And that's a new development that's only taken place over the past decade or two, coupled with a virus that knows no boundaries, no limitations, and can travel anywhere in the world. So those nuances of how world leaders talk about threats then maybe not are as effective as the reality of the virus.
Yeah, I think we have, we forget too quickly that 100 years ago, I think a little more than 3% of the world population was wiped out by the Spanish flu, as it's called.
50 million across the globe at a time when the globe was much smaller in population.
Exactly, and there was no international travel like there is today, and seeing that some countries are just closing their borders, supposedly preventing people from traveling. This is such a weak and stupid reaction.
Will we see your prediction? Obviously you've seen a number of global crises. Will we see this? And I know you're not a healthcare expert per se, but will we see this? I'm sorry. I think he froze. Jean, can you hear me? We may have lost Jean Lesieur. We are going to try and get him back. We're going to take a break for 1 minute, and we will be back. Oh, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We got you back.
I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. We're just going to take a break and try and call you back, but you are here. Will we see this as a chance now to create a global healthcare response structure?
You mean worldwide?
Worldwide. That because, most of the top physicians that we've had conversations with, and we've talked to a number at Brown University Medical School as well as some other places, and they say, listen, this is bad, it's not that bad. The next one could be significantly worse.
Yeah, well, I think that that international of scientists and of medical scientists, I think it already exists. It exists at the university level. I mean, medical science level. The researchers are very global and internationally minded, and they share what they discover. And so I don't think there's any problem in that. The problem is with governments that seem to withdraw on and have very nationalistic, chauvinistic reactions. I mean, there are a few governments in the world who. And again, Mr. Trump is one of them, but Mr. Bolsonaro, lots of governments in European countries are turning towards very selfish, nationalistic, chauvinistic reactions. And not to brag about the French president, but Macron is a kind of an exception in the world today. Angela Merkel is going away, and she will be a big loss as far as this duty by politicians is to unite and not to just think, to go local. they 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 have. It's it's not only something we have to wish for, it's something that is necessary. I mean, the big issues that threaten the world today are global. They're not national. And
John, John, let me ask you, how has the media done? If you were to step back and rate how the American media, the global media has done in their performance in reporting on this issue.
Well, I think the media are, some media are doing great. Enough media are doing great. Any citizen, anywhere in the world, except maybe in some, harsh dictatorships,
Sure.
Every single citizen has the means to be informed reasonably, rationally, extensively, if he or she decides to do so. And the problem is that there's so many networks, so many pipes now that to go through the news that it's easier to confuse propaganda and information. But if I look at the United States, you have Fox News, which is a propaganda channel, even though it cannot survive as a purely propaganda channel. It's quite interesting to see that right now Fox News is being a little more objective about the gravity of the coronavirus crisis. There's a more varied attitude, I think, towards the news than there usually is. Maybe the virus is an exception, and then they will go back to their usual. But the media are doing great. I spend, even though I'm retired now, I spend like 2 hours every day going through various international media and feeling, much better informed at the end of the day than at the beginning. And it's true of even in countries which have nationalistic, very narrow-minded governments, but don't go into censoring the press too much. It's the level of information is, I think, very good.
Do you think I think this might be a case in which our short memory might help the recovery, both economically and globally? Do you think we'll be back to being an interacting global world of world travel and interaction as this begins to wane? I think experts are saying, maybe early to mid-summer. Do you think folks will be comfortable jumping on planes and traveling to Paris, or Australians coming to visit Rome?
Well, I hope so. I think so too. But there are some very worrying warning signs. Like I just saw this morning that in Italy, for example, younger people are dying from this virus. vast majority of people dying from this virus was like, people over 60 years old. I mean, I saw this morning that the 40 to 50 age category is being is falling now in Italy, which is a kind of example of what can go really, really bad, because as more and more people are identified as having the virus, hospitals are getting more and more overwhelmed, and you can tell that doctors are a bit worried about having to choose which people are going to survive and which people are not going to survive, and what's going to happen if, there are not enough respirators to help people survive. Okay, people are going to decide, okay, let's get rid of the older people and let's try to save younger people. If the virus hits hard younger people, what's going to happen? Now, it's going to be an incredible challenge for doctors and for societies as general to say, okay, yeah, well, it's so bad that we do have to get rid of the older generation. That's an awful thought to have, but is it so totally unrealistic? We don't know how this thing is going to evolve.
Well, let's end on a brighter note than doctors making decisions on who lives and dies. You started the conversation by talking about the TV viewership of the French president's speech was higher than the World Cup in which France played in. Will more French men and women remember this speech or Zidano's headbutt?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to wait a little bit, and I'm not in France right now, so it's I mean, well, it all depends. It all depends on how the medical aspects evolve. If it's worse and worse, then people will obviously remember for a long time, Macron's solemn speech in which he even started with that by saying it's going to get a lot worse,
Right.
Without even adding before it gets better. He just said it's going to get a lot worse. Angela Merkel said that 70% of the German population might be affected. I just saw that in Ohio, somebody is estimating that there are already 100,000 people who have been infected. So the memory we'll have of today in 2 months will entirely depend on what's coming up.
Jean Lesieur, thank you once again for joining us on GoLocal Live. Have a safe stay in the United States. We greatly appreciate you taking the time, and we hope to chat with you again in the future. For everyone who has tuned in, thank you very much. There's a number of updates on GoLocal. Please check them out. Again, reminding folks, Governor has closed the schools for next week, moving up a vacation that was scheduled later on, and also the number of cases in Rhode Island have jumped from 5 to 14. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I want to thank Jean Lesieur for Skyping in. We'll see you later today or over the weekend. Thanks so much.
Thank you.